And I am live. This is Tico Trin, aka Internal Sadist, and I'm going to talk about psychology for the most part today. Um, my personal views on psychology, for all intents and purposes. So this is what this video is going to be about. My honest views on psychology and why I think the way I do about psychology for the most part. Okay, cool. So naturally, my personal views on psychology is that when it comes to mental illnesses and psychology is I believe the actual mental illness is nothing more than a side effect of hardship trauma and or hardship trauma and or stress that the particular human being is going through for all intents and purposes. I believe that the actual illness itself, the actual mental illness itself, is nothing more than a side effect of that. And reasoning being is typically, if you look at humans as a whole, typically humans are pretty fine up until they're faced with a challenge or faced with overwhelming tasks or faced with, you know, something where they actually got to do some actual, where they got to use some actual mental, some brain power to actually power through. Um, Human beings are generally pretty, move through life pretty blissfully or sometimes we refer to as blissfully ignorant for the most part if they can actually pretty much work around those typical things for the most part. And what I mean by that is human beings' ability to human beings' ability to basically pull off and or do certain things without experiencing any of these things for the most part, like typically without any, as long as there's no stress or there's no nothing that can actually pose a mental a mental anomaly or a mental blockade for a human being. They generally are pretty blissful for the most part. And typically, um, a good example of that is ADHD. ADHD. If you know anything about ADHD, um, is they actually did something where, like, before, you sit down in school and you sit down all day, and like apparently the kid would be full of energy or his legs, and you would have to get up and move and always have to get up and move and help other people and stuff along the lines of that. And generally kids like that were seen as, ADHD for that reason. Even if they finished their work, they would like go and help another kid, or if they finished their work, they would go do something else. They were seen as ADHD. Typically, typically they found in a lot of the schools, if you give the child more work or give the child more challenging work, that whole entire diagnosis is not really necessary for the most part. And or if you actually put a stand-up desk in a room, that eliminates a lot of that shit that goes on for the most part, if you know what I mean. So what I'm basically saying is ADHD is basically nothing more than a side effect of boredom or a side effect of, you know, a lack of something to do, a lack of task for the most part. It's typically how I look at it, and it's typically how I view it. And a lot of the times, what a lot of people fail to realize about that is, especially boys, because like I noticed with boys, they tend to get diagnosed with ADHD at a higher rate than girls, typically. Because like what'll happen with a boy is a boy would finish his homework or finish his work, then he would try to go help somebody else. Then the teacher would try to say that he's being disruptive to the class when in fact he's actually helping the class. He's helping another classmate with his work for the most part, or he goes and does other things like play with a phone or play with a game or play crossword puzzles and stuff like that. All of a sudden, he has ADHD because he's done with his work, and you didn't give them enough work. And that's typically how it works when it comes to ADHD. Something I've always noticed especially when it comes to boys. Usually, 9 out of 10 times or 10 out of 10 times, if a boy is getting up and doing other things, either he's not being challenged properly, or he's um or he's bored for the most part. It's a good example of that. And this is like one of the many things where I talk about, like, I believe that the mental illness is nothing more than a side effect of whatever undue stress or undue circumstances that a person is actually going through for the most part. Because typically, it could, like I said, it could be all nipped in the bud if you get stand up desk. It could be all nipped in the bud if you actually give the child more work or more challenging work or a nice little caseload of work, basically. I mean, a nice little workload. For the most part, it can all be curbed if they just do things like that instead of like trying to smack little boys on medication because they finished their work and now they're going to go do something else because they're bored. That's not ADHD. That's poor teaching or poor schooling. For the most part, is typically how that works. I've noticed, and it's just stuff like that that just blows my mind when it comes down to it. Because like, there's a shit ton of boys conveniently on ADHD drugs that probably don't even need ADHD drugs. And the sad part about that, if you give them enough work, they can usually pretty much work through it and actually not usually not exhibit too many traits of ADHD for the most part because it's typically not ADHD in that at that point. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some outliers where they literally do have ADHD, which I tend to question myself. That's really a real thing, but yeah, but there are some outliers where they actually do exhibit that, but I often wonder about that myself. Then on top of that, there's a lot of those kids that fall into that category that were born before this whole entire stand-up desk and actually give a child more work era. Um, another good example is not just ADHD or ADD based. ADD is another good example of that too, where that label gets slapped on a lot of boys for no reason. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some boys that probably deserve that label. However, there are a vast majority of boys that got this label who merely just needed some more work, a bigger caseload. I mean, a bigger workload, or they needed stand up desks is another good example of that, or a fidget spinner, which actually is pretty interesting. I'm not a fan of fidget spinners, but if you're going to use one, they're always good to have for the most part. Another good thing about those is apparently, because I had a coworker that used to have a fidget spinner, and it actually helped him focus more, I guess, and things along the lines of that. It kept his mind off of certain things, and it kept him from wandering off random places too. But that's neither here nor there. He actually was a case where he actually was ADHD. Um, Another good example of stuff like that would be other psychological illnesses that are brought on by traumatizing experiences that just happen to pop up, to stress, to things along the line of that. Because like, there's a lot of people that get diagnosed with like serious illnesses. I mean, serious things that just really not all that serious. It just happened to be circumstance that made this happen. Like a good example of that is if a family member that you love dearly passes away. If you're not careful, if nobody knows, you're more inclined to be. Yeah, I was talking about that earlier. If you actually, give them stand up desk or give them more work, they tend to be fine because that's a big thing where boys get misdiagnosed with. I was talking about that too. That and 80 I mean ADD are two big things that boys always get misdiagnosed with due to the fact that nobody wants to give them the proper workload, and or like what it usually happens with those people, like I was saying when before you walked in, is typically a lot of those boys tend to like finish their work and they'll go help other people, or they'll finish their work and they'll go do something like play a video game or play a game or put together a puzzle, and it'll get labeled as ADHD for the most part. Or they'll get up from their seat and go help their classmates with their work too, but then it'll also get labeled as ADHD. Meanwhile, they finished their work. It's not like they just got up from their desk and didn't leave and just left their work there and didn't finish it. A lot of these, large chunk of these boys literally finish their work, then they get up and help other people. Um, it's very rare you see a boy get up before his work is done and go do some crap like that for the most part. Typically, when it's all said and done, his work is usually done for the most part. Is what that is. But back to like random occurrences that make it so that random diagnoses will pop up for the most part. A good example I was talking about is because I said my personal views on mental illnesses are typically mental illnesses basically are nothing more than side effects of what a person is actually going through mentally, emotionally, or physically at that point in time. It'd be no different than if you're feeling tired is a good example of that. Well, what's the side effects of feeling tired? You get groggy, you feel lazy, sometimes you're a bit fatigued, sometimes you can't move, just shit like that for the most part. Yeah. Yeah, sore legs will keep you in your seat most definitely. But they do have stand up desks now where like they people stand up at their desks and do their work basically. And that actually was a good that was actually a good thing to have for a lot of those children that were quote unquote so called ADD or ADHD. The fact that they were able to stand up basically kept them more focused, which was actually pretty funny instead of trying to slap them on medication. But typically back to what I was talking about. But I believe, yeah, like a good example, a lot of times, a lot of people are diagnosed with these diagnoses when in fact they don't really even need to be diagnosed with those diagnoses. Like I know a shit ton of people who went through a sad time in their lives and get diagnosed like it's something that's permanent or something like that. Like I know a woman that supposedly suffers from depression. Meanwhile, she was just sad for that moment, and she still takes medication for depression, even though she's not even depressed because apparently her mother passed away. So she was going through it basically. And that's typically what it is. Like it was a traumatizing experience. Your mom passed away. It's a person you love dearly, person who raised you, born you, bathed you, clothed you, and took care of you, passes away. Obviously, you're going to be distraught by that. There's no need to be slapping like, serious labels on something like that. It's something that just happened out of nowhere. If they diagnose people every single time somebody died, the pharmaceutical companies will be making a shit ton of money right now, which is very sad. And the sad part about that, there's a lot of people that get thrown up into these categories for long term for something that happened that you would normally be sad about in the first damn place, which is actually pretty sucky. Like if your pet if a parent passed away or if a friend passes away, or some people if you lose your dog and shit like that, you don't necessarily have to be depressed for the rest of your life. It's not clinical depression. It's typically something that was brought on by real world experience for the most part. Just like another good example of good example of a diagnosis that I really find bogus is anxiety. Typically, typically everybody across the board, if they reach their limits or if they reach their quota or their cap on what they can actually handle, a lot of people get panic attacks for the most part. I'm pretty sure like I'm pretty sure if you reach your limits on which you can possibly handle versus what you can handle, you're gonna have anxiety or you're gonna be stressed out or you're gonna go through some shit for the most part. And that's typically how it works. And this is what I mean by, mainly these diagnoses are nothing more than side effects from real issues that's going on in a lot of people's lives. Don't get me wrong, there are some people who actually do need the shit, do need the medication, and do need to follow through, and do need the medication and shit like that, and do need the treatment. However, that's a small majority comparative to the vast majority that they try to slap on medication because the pharmaceuticals company thought it'd be a great idea for the most part. And and it's typically what it is. And as far as schizo, um, that could actually be brought on by actual trauma and stress also, which is actually pretty interesting that you bring that up. Underwear on head. That actually could literally be brought on by a trauma in your life or something that happens to you, or if you were put in a situation where your safety was questioned for the most part, or your well-being and safety was at risk, and your well-being and safety was at risk for the most part typically. So I wouldn't be shocked if yours was brought on by like some type of traumatizing experience where like your life your safety was put in jeopardy to the point where that's how your body reacts. Because the neat thing about the human body is it's going to react naturally to things that happen to it. It'd be no different than if you got scared and jumped, or if you got scared and not cortisol, well, cortisol start rushing through your system, or adrenaline starts rushing through your system. You're actually going to react based on the hormones and chemicals rushing through your body, obviously. And this is the problem that I have with this whole entire broad phrase where they say chemical imbalance. Um, it's a nice way to be able to. It's a nice way and a nice catch-all so they can be able to put people on medication for all intents purposes, no matter what the situation is. Let it be. What's up, Corey? Still, let it be. Let it be you. Let it be your mom passing away. Let it be you're stressed out at work because you have a higher caseload than normal. Let it be deadlines coming up at work, so you're stressed out. Let it be, you know, you witnessed a crime, to you had a crime happen to you, to you were traumatized, and or you felt really, really scared in a situation where you feel as though your body feels as though, or you feel as though you had no control over, and you're replaying your mind over and over again. It's typically how it works. And a lot of people actually go through this stuff. Like, it's one of those things where it's like just a side effect of a life experience. I wouldn't say it actually needs. I wouldn't say it actually needs medication to. It doesn't always need medication to always fix it. Sometimes you just need to talk to somebody to fix it. Medication is not always needed for the most part. And this is where a lot of people mess up, and this is where a lot of the pharmaceutical companies get it wrong. But they really don't get it wrong because at the end of the day, it's a pharmaceutical company, so they're all about their bottom line any damn way, which really sucks. But yeah, there's a lot of people who actually who actually fake suffer from shit like this, when in fact they really don't suffer from shit like this for the most part, or it's just a short term thing or a temporary thing due to circumstances and or actual stress, actual real life stress that was brought upon the body for the most part. It's typically how it works. And it's sad when you watch people go through things and it can't be prevented. Or when you watch, I mean, it's one thing if you watch somebody go through something and it couldn't be prevented, whereas if you watch somebody go through something and it could be prevented for the most part. um like a good example, if you scare a kid and attempt to like try to kidnap a kid, 9 times out of 10 he's going to be traumatized by the situation. Or if he watches his mom go through abuse, he or she watches their mom go through abuse, it puts a whole entire psychological spin on this shit, where it's to the point where like they believe that's how a relationship's supposed to be for the most part. So at the end of the day, a lot of the times it could be environmental, and or it could be hereditary, or it could be based on something that just happened to pop up in that child's life or that person's life at the moment, for the most part. So I personally don't believe that all diagnoses need to be slapped on all many different people. I believe it's nothing more than a side effect of what the child or the human being is going through at the moment. Let it be stress at work, let it be a heavy workload, let it be, you know, uh, the kid feeling restless because he doesn't have enough work to actually, soothe his soul, to, stuff along the lines of that for the most part. And that's typically my thoughts on it for all intents and purposes. And it sucks, but it is what it is. My personal beliefs on it is like not everybody that's on medication needs to be on medication for the most part, or not everybody that is diagnosed properly. Also, the same token, because 9 times out of 10, a lot of the people that are diagnosed probably went through something like their family passed away. Now they got clinical depression. Meanwhile, for some odd reason, mentally and psychologically, they done move past their parents dying, but they're still seen as clinically depressed. Or they had a bad day at work and they flipped, and all of a sudden now that they're manic depressive, or they suffer from mood swings or episodes for the most part. Well, everybody suffers from mood swings in all technicality once you think about it. It's typically how it works. To say somebody suffers from mood swings would be like your average human being, especially if you actually talk to women long enough, you'll realize that they go through a long range of emotions, a wide range and a long range of emotions anyway. Like, you talk to a woman long enough, she'll be happy, she'll be sad, she'll be mad, she'll be glad, she'll be upset, she'll be all the above for the most part. And that's typically how that works. So, yeah, that's pretty much my honest views when it comes to mental illnesses and certain mental illnesses too, and how you set things up and how you make things work for the most part. And basically, a lot of these can actually be avoided if the people are properly diagnosed properly, not like some long term stuff. Like, you can't be putting people as freaking depressed or something like that when in fact they just lost a loved one, or they just was having a down day that day for the most part, or heaven forbid they have a down day a certain time of year every year for the most part. That's typically how it works. Obviously, if they have a time where they're actually depressed or sad or going through some stuff every single year at the same time every single year, in all technicality, it's obviously a traumatizing experience that they went through to make it so they're actually having this experience for the most part. And don't get me wrong, it sucks, but at the end of the day, it's not something that you could just sit here. These diagnoses are not just something you can sit here and hand out willy nilly, all because you want to control people, or you want to control the narrative or control your classroom for the most part, which really sucks. Because at that point in time, if that's what you got to do to control your classroom, that actually shows how good that actually shows your character as a teacher for the most part. If you have to just start drugging people over stuff you did in the video for the most part. I say video, damn. It's If you start drugging people over something that, that just happened randomly out of nowhere, or, that's not really a big thing for the most part. It sucks, but it is what it is. And the sad part about that is, like I said, we're all run by a corporation. I mean, the country's run by corporations, so I'm not shocked to see how many children end up on psychotropic drugs, or, antidepressants, and or, things along the lines of that for that reason. So I'm not shocked when it actually happens, and I'm not shocked when, I see kids end up on medications when in fact they probably don't need it. They probably just need to talk to some damn body, just talk it out mainly, and or explore yourselves both, you know, explore yourselves both mentally and emotionally in a therapist's office for the most part. It's typically how I view that, because, like I said, Not all people are manic depressive. Not all people are. Not all. I mean, don't get me wrong. That can fall into your range of moods, especially for women. That falls into your range of moods all the time. Don't get me wrong, but there are people who only hit. There are people that you know that get traumatized about that same time of year every year. It could be like a dog died. It could be a family member died. It could be something that happened that was horrific on that day for the most part, or around that day for all intents and purposes. It's just stuff like that just blows my mind when I see it happen to people and kids and grown ass men and grown ass adults for the most part, and it sucks. When in fact it could all be prevented had you had took the necessary steps to fix it. But the sad part about that's the problem with society. Society really doesn't want to fix it as much as they want something to complain about so they can actually make money off of it for the most part. And that's typically how it works. The more people can complain about some stuff, the more they can slap you on drugs, the more pharmaceutical companies can make money, the more that your politicians get a kickback from that money for the most part. It's typically how it works. But yeah, I digress. That's pretty much the end of this podcast. Y'all have a good night. Be blessed. I'm tired because I was working on updating some software all day for the most part. I got done not too long ago. So a nigga's tired. So I'm about to go lay it down and y'all have a blessed night and be good.